Sehr geehrte Damen und Herren, ich begrüße Sie sehr herzlich zur ersten Ausgabe des Studio Bonn im neuen Jahr und zur Auftaktveranstaltung unserer neuen Reihe Mensch ist ein Mensch über Kunst und Kultur nach dem 7. Oktober. Mein Name ist Sven Sappelt, ich bin seit wenigen Tagen Kurator für Diskurs hier an der Bundeskunsthalle und seit ungefähr 30 Minuten Moderator dieses Abends. Das hat einfach damit zu tun, dass wir wetterbedingt und krankheitsbedingt leider zwei Ausfälle haben. Hito Steyerl liegt mit Fieber im Bett
cannot
in
come
Berlin.
today
Gute Besserung
because
an
of
dieser Stelle, falls Sie am Freitag
ill
im
health.
Livestream zuschauen
Hito
sollte.
Steyerl
Nicole Deitelhoff,
is
die
sick
andere
at home in
Moderatorin,
bed, and
steckt im
Nicole
Stau nur wenige
Deitelhoff,
Kilometer
she's
hier vor der
stuck in
Tür,
the
aber dann
traffic
doch
jam,
eben
not far from
festgefahren.
Bonn, but unfortunately
Nichtsdestotrotz
she
haben wir eine
can't
ganze
be
Reihe
here
von
on
tollen
time.
Gästen heute
But we
Abend
still
bei
have
uns.
an
Ich
impressive
darf ganz
panel
herzlich
of
begrüßen
guests tonight.
Bracha,
I'd like
Lichtenberg,
to
Ettinger,
welcome
Künstlerin,
Ms. Bracha
Philosophin,
Ettinger,
Psychoanalytikerin,
artist, philosopher,
bewandert sozusagen auch in
psychoanalyst.
der Arbeit mit Traumata und vor
She
allem
has
mit dem
a
Holocaust.
lot of
Ich freue mich
experience
sehr,
working with
Meron Mendel heute
trauma
Abend hier zu
victims,
haben,
also
in einer etwas
Holocaust
veränderten
victims.
Situation,
I'd
nicht
like
als
to
Moderator,
welcome
sondern
Meron
tatsächlich auch als
Mendel
einer der
as
Referenten
one of
und
the
Johanna
moderators
Adam
and
als Kuratorin der
speakers, and
Bundeskunsthalle.
Johanna Adam, one of the curators of the
Ich freue mich
Bundeskunsthalle.
sehr auf
So,
den
looking forward very
gemeinsamen
much to
Austausch
our
und
debate
gleichzeitig ein
tonight.
bisschen darum, dass wir heute ein bisschen
And
improvisieren müssen.
please
von
bear
dem
with us
ursprünglichen
for having to
Fahrplan
improvise a little bit because we've had to
abweichen.
change our program due to the
Ein Mensch
absence
ist ein
of two of
Mensch,
our
die
guests.
neue Reihe
A Mensch is a
wurde schon
Mensch,
vor
the
einer ganzen
title of
Weile
our new series of
vorbereitet.
talks,
Die
has
Überlegungen
been
dazu reichen
prepared
zurück,
for quite a
mehrere
while,
Monate, mehrere
for several
Jahre.
months
Die
and even
Bundeskunsthalle
years.
hat sich ja sehr
The
intensiv auch mit der
Bundeskunsthalle
Frage
dealt
des
very intensively with the
Antisemitismus
question of
beschäftigt.
anti-Semitism.
Das Ganze hat jetzt mit dem 7.
Now,
Oktober
the whole
eine
thing,
ganz
of
neue,
course,
dramatische
became
Brisanz
much more
bekommen.
dramatic
Wir wollen
due
heute
to
nicht so
October
sehr
7th and what
über den
happened on
Horror
that day.
der eigentlichen
Tonight
Fakten
we
sprechen,
don't
sondern
want
wir
to
wollen den
focus that
Fokus ein
much on the
wenig
horror of what
verengen
happened on that
auf die
day,
Diskussion
but
hier in
we'd
Deutschland,
rather
auf die
want to
Debattenkultur
focus on
und vor allen
the
Dingen
culture
auch
of
auf das, was
debate in
innerhalb der
Germany,
Kunst- und
in the
Kulturwelt
arts community.
passiert. Wir
Especially.
alle erleben, dass
Now,
es
all of
schwierig
us
geworden ist,
are
Dinge zu
witnessing
sagen,
that it
Dinge
has become
öffentlich zu
difficult to
formulieren.
say
Wir wissen,
certain
dass die
things,
Sensibilitäten
especially in
auf den
public.
unterschiedlichsten
There are
Seiten
lots
sehr,
of
sehr groß sind.
sensibilities
Und wir
on
wollen
all
gemeinsam
sides
heute
that are
Abend
easily
versuchen,
hurt.
ein wenig uns
Tonight,
anzunähern
we
an die
want to get a
Problematik,
little closer to
auch an die
this issue,
Begrifflichkeiten, auch an die
also talk about
Vorgeschichten.
some of the
Und wir wollen aber
terminology.
gewissermaßen nicht verharren im Status
But we
quo
don't
und
want
der
to be
Analyse
stuck
dessen,
in a
was bereits
status
geschehen
quo,
ist,
just
sondern wir wollen
analyzing what
gemeinsam nach vorne
happened,
denken
but we
und
want to
überlegen,
think
was
ahead,
erwarten wir
to
denn, was
look
wünschen
ahead,
wir uns denn,
to see what
ohne
we
vielleicht auch wirklich dann
want
Einfluss nehmen zu können, aber doch zumindest
to see in the
perspektivisch
future,
in die Zukunft, wie kommen
how
wir
we
denn
can
vielleicht
exert some
aus all dem
influence on
Dilemma
what is
auch ein
happening
Stück
in the
weit
future,
wieder raus.
something that leads us out
Ich
of
würde
this
beginnen
dilemma
gerne
that
mit
we're in
Johanna
right now.
Adam,
I'd
hier
like to start out
Kuratorin
with
am
Johanna
Hause
Adam,
und
curator
unter
here
anderem
at the
eben auch
Bundeskunsthalle,
verantwortlich
and among
für
other
die
things
Ausstellung
also she
über
was
ein
responsible for the
Deutsche sozusagen,
exhibition
also
Who
wir
We
als
Are,
Einwanderungsland,
reflecting
lesen Sie
on
falsch,
a
ich kann Sie
country
gleich
of
korrigieren.
immigrants.
Das ist einer
That was the
Fauxpas der
title
Neuen, ich habe
of
den Titel nicht
her
notiert,
exhibition.
aber der sozusagen eine tolle Ausstellung, die sich
So,
über
a
Deutschland
great
als
exhibition
Einwanderungsland Gedanken
dealing with
gemacht hat.
Germany as a
Und
country of
das ist ja auch mit der
immigrants.
Documenta
Now,
verknüpft,
Johanna,
das
you
sozusagen
are
in der
also linked to the
Documenta
Documenta in
13
Kassel.
damals mitgearbeitet.
You were involved in the
Insofern ist es
Documenta
vielleicht ein ganz
13
guter Einstieg hier vom Haus
some years
ausgehend
ago.
nochmal zu
So
rekapitulieren,
maybe
was
it's a
damals
good idea to
vor meiner
start
Zeit
our discussion
passiert
by
ist und
thinking back
wie
to
du
what
das erlebt
happened
hast
then
auch.
and what happened with this exhibition here in this house. Now, the exhibition that you just mentioned and which also basically triggered this series of talk was the exhibition entitled Who We Are, reflecting on a country of immigrants, which we opened last year here in the Bundeskunsthalle. And A Mensch is a Mensch, the title of the series of talks, was also part of this exhibition. It's a work of art by Naneci Yurdagül, one of the artists who was featured at the exhibition, a work that relates to values that played a central role for us in this exhibition. Now, the Yiddish terms were reflected in some aspects of the exhibition, and we also reproduced a photography of his work, and so it was an important issue for us to have this reflected in the exhibition, not just the history of immigration in Germany after 1945, but also, and this was also part of the core message of the exhibition, exhibition was racism, talking about racist structures in our society, talking also about anti-Semitism, anti-Zionism, because otherwise you could legitimately ask, why do you raise this issue of anti-Semitism in an exhibition on immigration into Germany? Now, of course, we have to raise this topic when we talk about immigration into Germany, because these issues are linked, but anti-Semitism is primarily not an issue of immigration in Germany, because, of course, we've had Jewish people living in Germany for a long, long time, and it's not just an aspect of immigration. But talking about racism, of course, you also need to talk about racism and anti-Semitism after 1945. And we want to talk about patterns of discrimination, so anti-Semitism cannot be excluded from that. Let me just briefly mention two aspects of the structure of the exhibition. We didn't do this exhibition just on our own, and this was clear right from the start. We wanted to involve many people coming from many different angles in this. The DOMIT, the Documentation Center on Immigration, was one of our partners, one of our academic partners, and they also provided works of art to us. And there was a real team of curators. Ms. Batebok and others were co-curators, and they played an important part developing the concept and the design of the exhibition, selecting the works of art. But the team was even much bigger than that. I can't mention all the names that played important roles in designing the exhibition. But it was a project of the many, and it was a project of many people that were involved about a country of immigration, but somehow that message was overshadowed a little bit, right? Can you tell us what happened? Well, overshadowed, I wouldn't use that term. What actually happened was that a couple of weeks, maybe 3.5 weeks after the exhibition was opened, we received a message, an email by Volker Beck, the founder and chairman of Tikva e.V., giving us some information that in our exhibition he identified a work of art that he considered to be anti-Semitic. We immediately, of course, took this accusation very seriously. We were shocked, of course, first of all. Now, how shall I put this? I mean, things happened very fast after that, and maybe I should add the way the debate is unfolding right now. Even though it wasn't that long ago, but the debate was very different then from what it is now. But still, we felt that some of these statements were very provocative. A lot of polemics was used, now confronting us with these accusations, because we were informed that with this email that we received, also the Minister of Culture was informed, the Federal Chancellery was informed. Also, this basically went out to media outlets, to the press. So primarily, it was not just an invitation to us to comment on this and to enter into a dialogue. It was immediately also a kind of a game that was played with the public in Germany. So we received in this email quite a detailed explanation of what the sender considered to be anti-Semitic in this work of art, the anti-Semitic motives in that work. So, as in many cases, we need to take a differentiated look at this and what actually happened and what were the consequences. We're going to take a closer look at this later on, but I would like to bring in Mendel, director of the Anne Frank Education Center, among other positions that he has, also an expert in the Commission on the Documenta 15, in order to investigate the accusations that were leveled then, accusations of anti-Semitism. Could you explain what happened at the time with the Documenta 15, whether there are any parallels to the case here in the Bundeskunsthalle? Thank you very much. Good evening. I think what happened here at the Bundeskunsthalle is a kind of a paradigm for a topic that is much broader. So in this case, it was about one work of art, the so-called ABC of Racism by Daniela Ortiz, which was embedded in an exhibition which was clearly sending a message against racism in German society, against a kind of a tradition of racism, and a very impressive, really, display of works of art against racism. Also, really a good look at Jewish history in Germany after 1945. And then there is one work of art that possibly raises a problem. And that was the accusation that this work of art used anti-Semitic symbols and motives. I mean, we didn't really interpret the images in too much detail, but we just wanted to see what can we learn from this case. In this case, it was an image, a kind of a collage, a glorification of the BDS movement, the boycott movement against the state of Israel, not just a boycott of goods, economic goods, but also boycotting people, basically. So a movement which would be opposed to inviting artists from Israel to come to Germany, for example, and also glorifying terror. That was also part of the accusation. And after October 7th, as you mentioned before, things have changed, and there's a particular pain that is involved in this. So, on the one hand, you've got a well-intentioned exhibition which is actually designed to be against racism, and on the other hand, you have a work of art which is in one aspect, in one message, considered to be anti-Semitic. So actually expressing the exact opposite. And so unfortunately, Nicole Deitelhoff is not with us, and we got a call whether we would be willing to analyze this, to investigate this as experts, and maybe to find a constructive way out of this dead-end street, out of this dilemma. And maybe I can say this on behalf of Nicole as well, because we are sufferers really from the Documenta 15, but we accepted this assignment, so we came here a couple of days later, and without discussing too much, we agreed that we didn't want to walk into the same trap as at the Documenta 15, because at Documenta 15, without sharing too many details, there was one camp that shouts anti-Semitism, and there's another camp that shouts racism or censorship. And our goal really was to come together with everybody who's responsible here at the Bundeskunsthalle to have a constructive, issue-oriented dialogue and talk about the problem at hand. And that's why we agreed from the start that this is not about censorship. We don't want to remove a work of art or cover it up, because this is part of the context of the exhibition, this work of art. And if you will, it's a reflection of a tension or a set of issues that exist in society, and this is displayed here. And now we have to handle this situation, and not by covering it up, but by discussing it. And so this led to a very, very exciting process, really, where in this circle of people we had a lively discussion on the accusations, what might be justified, what might not be justified. Everybody was asked to give their opinion, and out of this process, a text was generated, a kind of an explanatory text to put things in context, contextualization, and for me, I think this is just a continuation of what the visitors to the exhibition were able to see. So an artistic process is always an interactive process. How do you react to a certain work of art? What does the work of art really trigger in myself? And then you can have an input, your own thoughts, your ideas, without touching the work of art.
Now, this sounds very nice in theory, but at the same time, we can see that it is basically impossible to have this matter-of-fact debate, because it is a highly emotional debate that also comes with personal attacks and hostilities. You yourself have also been affected by such hostilities, so tell me, how are you dealing with all that tension? On the one hand, you're saying that, yes, you want to have a matter-of-fact debate based on facts, but at the same time, of course, you need to defend yourself against, attacks and hostilities. How are you handling this? Well, just like you said, I mean, you need to handle it, and you need to expect that. I'm not a curator, I'm not an artist myself, I don't have a background in culture and arts, I have an educational background, and that's why, well, I realize that if you become active in this field, then you should be prepared for criticism. And not everybody who criticizes you hates you. And that's what I keep on telling the artists as well and curators. Very often, if somebody criticizes us quite harshly and maybe opposes something emotionally, then we tend to be offended. We feel insulted because we gave it a lot of thought and we just wanted to give our best, and then we ask ourselves, how can somebody, put us down like that? But it is part of the process. It's not censorship. As far as I'm concerned, no, I haven't really been confronted with hate. Even though I was upset, and I did say, okay, how can you possibly come up with such allegations? I didn't mean it that way at all. So you need to put up with it, but there are certain limits. If it's not about the facts, if it's to do with my background or whom I'm married to or my children, that is a different story. That's a red line. But I think we should be bolder. We should show more courage. And I'm also criticizing myself here. I think we've made it too easy for us. We've always remained in the comfort zone recently, and we always make sure that we are using the right jargon and the right terms, and that's all very well. But if this means that we can no longer have a tough debate, then this is the wrong way. Mrs. Lichtenberg, Ettinger. For many years, decades in fact, You've been dealing with all sorts of conflicts, including anti-Semitism and, of course, the events in the wake of the 7th of October, which is something that is very hard to bear. And Mr. Mendel just said we need to have, a tough debate. We need to put up with that. You, as an artist, how do you look at the current situation? How do you experience it? And what are the limits of what you can endure? What are the limits to such a debate?
Yeah, I'd like to start by saying that when I joined the Documenta 16 Finding Committee, this is almost 6 months, or I don't know how many months before the 7th of October. There have been already discussions, and we were moving forward. And the 7th of October came, as a surprise to everybody. I couldn't fly to Germany. I couldn't participate in person in the Finding Committee work. And I spent the meeting, our big meeting, in Tel Aviv. And I say meeting, but I mean 16 hours in Zoom over 2 days, in which we had missiles all over the head, and we had the news of the massacre, and all the time, Israel is a small country, so we also have people that we know, women raped and so on, and it was 4 or 5 days after 7 October, the meeting, and I was quite in shock, and the flight was cancelled. And already at that point, it was unbearable because the war started, and the Israeli army started to attack in Gaza, and this is horrible for me as well, because also women and children again. My work is not a generalized work on the Holocaust or on racism or anything. My painting, and I'm working for 40 years with certain images from the period of the Holocaust, and the precise subject is women and children about to be shot in a minute. I'm working with image that was taken in Ukraine, and there is this image, and each time, I spent 8 hours, 9 hours, over 40 years looking at every detail and working with it in a certain way, in transparency upon transparency, until it becomes oil painting, and this gives me a lot of time to think. And I would say, first of all, that if the feeling of women or mothers in this world would have any value, then we would have another kind of world. And that's my feeling when I work with all this and asking myself the question, how could anybody, a 20-year-old, somebody shoot a woman who's pregnant and open her womb, and suddenly something like that happened. And since I'm not only artist but also a civilian, in Israel, I work for many years in 4 organizations of Israeli and Palestinians who work together for peace. So we have Women for Peace, we have Combatant for Peace, we have the Forum of Bereaved Family, which is a very complex and unbelievable idea where bereaved family from the Palestinian side and from the Israeli side work together and to understand the human side of bereavement and how tragic this world is. And Physician for Human Rights, where Palestinian and Israeli goes and give real health services. Because I do believe in, and this is a part of my thinking about art and also about theory, that we have to work with one another. I'm thinking this concept of co-emergence, is me and not me, I and non-I, other and ourselves, co-emerging and working together because we need to share this tragic land, and we are accumulating so much ruin. So it was very, very, very difficult, and I asked to slow down, and I think that it was both a thinking that we must rethink what is art, but also it's a part of the way I understand the world and I understand art. There is something, this kind of immediate hysterical reaction has to do with the cultural and political surrounding, and we feel, as an artist, I feel it everywhere, and I ask myself, I insist that there is a domain called art. It's not isolated from the rest of the world. And we might have artists whose domain is politics, or artists whose domain is the abstract work, or artists whose domain is certain thematics. But the idea that, and art is a slow process of thinking and meditation, and there is always the balance of what is now and what is more eternal or historical or memory, future, past. All these, for every artist, there's so many ingredients that are taken into account. And there is a fragility in the work of an artist. And you are opening yourself in order to face the world, whatever comes. And some of whatever comes is tragic, depends on the subject that you choose. So the idea that at each moment the art world has to be subjugated. Not the art world, the artists have to be subjugated to all kind of cultural politics and politics of the world and politics of the, is putting a heavy burden, I think, on the shoulder of artists. Right now people are scandalized that there are cancellations of people who express themselves wrongly. I don't like it. I think it's not a way to move forward. We need to find other ways. But the elephant in the room is that artists who live in Israel are cancelled all the time. I've been cancelled. After I resigned from Document, I've been cancelled in Germany. And I understood the art place sent me a beautiful email in which they say they are too young institutions to carry upon themselves the weight of whatever they will have to deal with in case I do the show. And I understood them. I said to myself, it's much bigger museums who have to take on their shoulder this discussion. And what do we teach the young curators that they should be afraid to move to the left or to move to the right? But what really bothers me on that is that how can anybody boycott anybody in terms of his country? Because as a civil person, as a feminist person, when women in Iran are struggling their government, I support the women of Iran. I don't boycott all the Iranian. I'm asking myself, what is also the position, the individual position of each artist? So that's the only country in the world where artists are blocked because they are Israeli, which means we accept that identity is decided through your nation. And there's too many things that I really don't understand. And when in that moment, in the documentary moment, what made me even more feeling bad is that people wrote to me, people who would normally take my word for whatever for many years, that only people who are colonialists, propagandists, whatever, believe the propaganda that women were raped in Israel and babies were beheaded. And so it was, and the silence, there was a silence in the art world. And it looked like this is going to be the unspoken, this is going to be hidden, this is very quickly going to disappear. And I understand also the need to discuss what happens now. What happens now is people are kidnapped on the Israeli side and people suffer in Gaza. There is a real disaster, and anybody who has a heart, understand how tragic the situation is from all sides. But the way it is contextualized is a lot of politics and a lot of prejudgment and decision. Now, the world of art and the responsibility of artists has to do also with the freedom of artists. The responsibility of curator has to do with the freedom of curators. It's not the same. It's not the same. My responsibility is towards my materials as an artist.
Vielleicht können wir hier kurz einen Punkt machen.
Maybe we can just stop here for a moment. You just raised a couple of very big issues, and we'll come back to some of them. But let me just briefly go back to the beginning of what you said. You described the scene, if I understood it correctly. You said that there are some initiatives, campaigns that bring together Israeli and Palestinian artists and people of different backgrounds. And help me to understand, what does that look like specifically on site? Can you tell us how these people are handling that situation when they're actually separated? Because, of course, there are attempts from one side or another to drag people from the other side to your side. Or sometimes people are put under pressure because they want to work with the other side. Can you tell us how that really works, that cooperation specifically and on site, and how the individual players are dealing with this tension?
Let's start from the fact that before the war, about 9 months or 10 months, there have been demonstrations in Israel, right? And you would have imagined that we will have a support of the world in relation to our demonstrating. Nothing. And I wondered, and I asked myself, how is it possible that, again, but what you know very well, that some people believe in collaboration and cooperation and cohabitation in the form of two societies that will self-define themselves and live side by side with their own country or any kind of solution. I mean, people were born there for 5 generations, now 9 generations, 11 generations. Nobody's going anywhere. Either we will find a way to live together or we will all die together. So there's a lot of people that believes that we and want to collaborate. On the other hand, there are people, and this comes a lot also from pressure from abroad, that say that, in Israel, when somebody says we want Israel from the river to the sea, we call him extremist. We say, no way, there are 2 people here. And then there are other voices coming and saying that from the river to the sea, there should be only Palestine. So, and they are not considered extremists, they're considered mainstream. So I don't understand it. I know there is a pressure not to work together, but we work together, that's a fact. We work together because we want to imagine a future. And we cannot only imagine the past, and even with the past, at least we can bring more knowledge to the situation. We cannot start with colonialism in 1948. My parents came to Israel as rescued from the Holocaust, and they came as refugees, as minorities who were persecuted. And in personal, they came as a very, very, very poor people who struggled with poverty for 20 years until they got into their feet because the whole family was killed and so on. So we could start a story thinking about whatever puts us together and make us understand one another, like what is the meaning of being a refugee? What is the meaning of being a minority? The many things we could think of that would make us desire to understand one another on a in humanized terms. And as I say, I see very clearly the political level as a different level, both from the artistic level and from ethics. I think that...
Ich würde gerne mal schwenken wieder zurück nach Deutschland.
I would like to come back to Germany for a minute.
Das, was vor Ort in Israel geschieht, auch ein bisschen eine Überforderung
because what's happening in Israel is almost too much to absorb for some people, it seems. And it was mentioned that we don't really want to get out of our comfort zone here in Germany. Maybe a question for you, Johanna. Adam, as a country of immigration, now Germany faces immigrants from many parts of the world who come here with their convictions, but also with their conflicts. So this living together, this coexistence that you mentioned in the case of Israel is also an issue here in Germany, and quite a pertinent issue. So reflecting on a country of immigrants was the title of your exhibition. So how is Germany handling the tension and the potential conflicts?
Ja, vor diesem Hintergrund vielleicht noch mal
so 2-3 Anmerkungen. Maybe just 2 or 3 comments on the concept and the design of the exhibition. The exhibition wanted to start from the recent past in Germany, from the specific history of immigration that has happened in Germany and that has created the Germany as you see it today. And what kind of path did Germany take to be the Germany that it is now? Now, there was the policy of recruitment of so-called guest workers, migrant workers in some countries. That was a German government program. So that was one focus of our exhibition. But we didn't really try to give people a full history of immigration to Germany after 1945, but we just wanted to pick out some highlights. The immigration directly after 1945, for example, where we also included the aspect of Germans that were driven out of formerly German territories in the wake of the Second World War, but also Jewish life in Germany, the Jewish life that came back to Germany in certain communities, but also migration flows starting with the 80s and 90s, so-called Jewish quota refugees from formerly Soviet regions that really gave a boost to many Jewish communities in Germany. So this was basically the range of topics that we wanted to to work on. But we also used a lot of archive material to enrich this exhibition, using works of art to raise certain issues, to get people to think about certain issues, but also to put things into a better context and to help people understand the situation. And so we had different chapters in the exhibition relating to different issues, how the German society has handled certain conflicts. And we also said that the questions that were raised, and this is how I understood Bracha's comment, art cannot answer all these questions. Art cannot pretend to answer all these questions, but art also doesn't happen in a vacuum or without a context. So we deliberately chose certain perspectives, certain angles in this exhibition, and this is one of my key jobs as a curator, to create context for these questions. And I think we managed to do that in many parts in this exhibition, and we failed to do this in this one case, which we talked about before. And in this one case, we overlooked one important point, and that is anti-Semitic symbols and motives, and this was a major learning moment for me, this awareness that there's something I have to work on, really. This is something that I didn't do correctly, but this is also a broader topic. Maybe it was a mixture of naivety, maybe it was, we found it a little too easy to just look the other way, or to think it's not going to happen to us. Anti-Semitism is not going to happen to us. So this was a kind of a blind spot that we were not aware of. And the criticism that was leveled at us was pretty harsh. And it was quite polemical. It was a very harsh accusation. But we also actually, of course, attacked in this exhibition. We wanted to attack racism, structural racism, but in anti-Semitism, there's of course also the aspect of racism, and we failed to recognize that. Mr. Mendel, how do you see the debate going on in Germany right now? Now, what we can see now in the media is rising anti-Semitism in Germany, in Berlin, in Neukölln, the district. There were celebrations in the street after October 7th by Arabs, Palestinians, and these images were shocking for many Germans. What's your view of this? If I may, I'd like to refer back to your question before, conflicts that are imported into Germany. Yes, as an immigration society, we have to deal with conflicts that did not originate here. Now, Ukrainians and Russians that come to Germany, they bring their conflict, Kurdish people, Turkish people, but also within certain communities. If you've got Iranians that support the regime, Iranians that fight the regime, all these conflicts are played out here as well. But actually they have nothing to do with us, but they do, because these people now live here, and these people still have very strong ties to the places where they were born, where they grew up. But I think the Middle East conflict has a different function, though. Of course, there are those who biographically are linked to Israel. Two of them are here on the panel, and there are also people who have very strong family ties to Palestinians, or they are maybe sons and daughters of Palestinian refugees, but they only make up a small part of the debate. And this is the only debate where the large part of the actors in this debate, and those who are most vehement, are those who do not have these direct links, but only a kind of a symbolic link. What is a symbolic link? We have about 200,000 Palestinians in Germany, but 5.5 million Muslims coming from very different regions in the world. But our projection seems to be that all Muslims support the Palestinian cause. And this is an aspect that you mentioned in your question, people taking to the streets in Neukölln, in Berlin, to celebrate Hamas' attack on Israel. But very few of those were Palestinians. So the question is, why do people project certain things onto the Palestinian cause? And it's not just a question addressed to migrants, but it's also a question addressed to native Germans, if I may call them this, because it tells us a lot about how we debate the Middle East conflict. Because it's also a debate about who we are. Why am I a moral person, for example? This is the question that we try to answer by defining our position in this conflict. So I want to learn a lesson from the Holocaust, that's why I side with Israel. Or I am an anti-racist, that's why I am on the side of the Palestinians. Because they have been suppressed by European colonialism, Jews coming from Europe who acted as a colonial power, suppressing the Palestinians. These are the two big narratives that are pitted against each other. And so this is the real debate. And now coming back to your question, this is being debated all the time, these two narratives. But what happened on October 7th acted as a trigger. Now, it seems that anti-Semitism is not something celebrated by Palestinians in Germany, but it does seem to be an ideological issue in the Muslim community, because it's linked to also a position coming from the Muslim Brotherhood and other such groups. So it does come from a Muslim community to some extent, but on the other hand, we must not really blame all Muslims for being anti-Semitism. So the religion as such is not the major issue, but the radical ideology that is linked to a religion that goes back to the 20s and 30s, when the Muslim Brotherhood, for example, was founded, or the Hamas was founded. That is the bigger problem. And that's a threat that needs to be taken seriously. And it's not just directed against Jewish people, but other people as well, including artists. And so this is a challenge that we need to define. And of course, it shouldn't be, you shouldn't be xenophobic in this debate, but you need to address certain issues. Now, how do we handle this? How do we handle this dilemma?
Well, I did not only talk about anti-Semitism or racism, but I talked about how people somehow automatically support either one side or another, very emotionally so. And Bracha, Lichtenberg, Ettinger described it very well. When you look, for somebody who's interested in the situation in Israel and Palestine, then you would ask yourself, what Israelis and what Palestinians do I want to support and who not? Obviously, I don't want to support anyone who supports, the idea that millions of Palestinians or Israelis should be killed. I mean, there are all sorts of fantasies out there, from people who are dreaming of either Israelis or Palestinians being killed. And I obviously wouldn't support these people. But they don't even look at this very complex situation with all the conflicts that we've had for so many years, but they only look at themselves. And they just want to confirm to themselves that they are on the right side, morally speaking, and that's the problem. Maybe we can take this one step further, if only theoretically, because it's hard to find the right terminology here. Often you know, we're talking about victims on all sides. And often we refer to the victim role, so to speak, which is used as a pretext to attack others. Do you have an explanation for that from your point of view? Well, first of all, being a victim used to be something that people were ashamed of, something that you would hide. Today, it's a kind of a ticket to the debate. I mean, you wouldn't call it victim, you'd call it somebody affected by something. But it sort of legitimizes your participation in a debate if you are affected by something bad yourself. And it makes me chuckle here because I attended a panel discussion in Vienna recently, and one of the panelists who had talked about the Palestinians in Gaza all the time always referred to them as we. And then somebody from the audience, it was a woman, she then said, so you are Palestinian, are you? And he said, no, I'm not. But then she said, okay, but you have family there, friends, relatives? And he said, no, I've never been there. And then she said, okay, so how are you affected by this? And he said, well, I'm Muslim. And that's why people always ask me about the situation of the Palestinians, and that's why I feel that I am personally affected. You know, it's that people feel almost obliged to be affected by something themselves as a legitimization to get involved. So I'd say somehow critically that this is one of the problems we have in our political debate today. Of course, yeah, we need to take into account each other's points of view. Yes, that, but we also need to look at each other's arguments, and it should be reasonable. You know, this idea of to say that only those affected can talk about a problem. For instance, people who are affected by racism are the only ones who can talk about racism, or the same for anti-Semitism. They're the only ones who can tell us what anti-Semitism is. I think that's a problem to think that. Because the moment I say, I am Jewish, and what you just said hurt me, then this is the end of the debate. Because what else could you say? But I'm sorry, I didn't mean to hurt you. And you wouldn't even be able to call this into question. So it's difficult. And if somebody, you know, says something like that, then sometimes people come up with a counter-argument immediately. But that's part of the problem that has brought us here today. Because as a society, most of us have stopped putting our debates on the basis of facts and reasonable arguments. We only look at our personal points of view. And this means that a lot of things fall by the wayside, especially, you know, a discussion based on facts, reasonable discussion. Mrs. Lichtenberg-Ettinger, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, I wanted to bring back the question of art in here, because very, very quickly, even in a museum, art is not there at all. What art can do is not there at all, and it's immediately under other kind of consideration, and we are immediately in a sociological or historical debate, and we are immediately in a debate that each person starts or put a spot on from a certain filter. There are so many, and art is there in order to open, because there is a kind of plurality of possibilities. I said before that the art, for me, is not the aesthetics. Art is between aesthetics and ethics. That's the particularity of the artistic. This is why it must have a place. It's between the aesthetics and ethics, and it can work towards questions of ethics and from ethics to inform politics, and not the other way around. And each time when it is from politics to inform the artistic, I feel uncomfortable, because we could start this from so many points, you wouldn't even know how to address it. I was reading, I printed it for myself, and this is provocative, but can we imagine something that would feel provocative when it was written 50 years ago? That's Vladimir Yankelevich, who was a philosopher who influenced a lot of contemporary philosophers and contemporary thinking. And he wrote in 1978, which is almost 50 years ago, anti-Zionism is the miraculous invention, the providential spirit that reconciles the anti-imperialist left and the anti-Semitic right. So he puts, it gives permission to be democratically anti-Semitic. What better than that? It is now possible to hate Jews in the name of progressive democracy. Isn't it great? This makes one dizzy. So this was 50 years ago. Today he would be killed. But when we think about it, when we think racism, in Germany, around the beginning of the 19th century, it was the protocol of the Zion, elderly of Zions that provoked a lot of anti-Semitism, and Hitler built on that in a big way. Nothing new. This mixture, I'm not anti-Semitic, I'm anti-Zionist, and so now, without knowing what is anti-Semitism on the one way, and without knowing necessarily what is anti-Zionism on the other way, and what is Zionism, you know how many forms there have been in Germany before the war, when you had Adorno and Walter Benjamin and Martin Buber and Horkheim and all those philosophers and thinkers of culture that were negotiating between themselves, and you have Echad Ha'am, and all of them were not even, I mean, each kind of an idea of why to leave Germany before it's become too late was different, different idea. Some people wanted a country, some didn't want. Some said the Jewish life can only develop itself in exile. And a lot of Jewish people agreed to that, by the way. And the reason was that if you have a state, you also start to have all the real problem of this world. And if you don't have a state, you can remain in all kind of fantasy life and only thinking. They were debating, there were so very many ideas, and then it was all accelerated because the Jews who escaped had nowhere to go. You had Brittany, who was colonizing the Palestine, and you had, but again, when you take any political idea, you ask yourself what goes on here. Because if we talk about colonialism, we should talk about Germany, Belgium, and Rwanda. How many millions called in Rwanda? Or we could talk about Turkey and the Kurd. We could talk about Armenia. We understand the Armenians' desire to return to a place where they can have identity. We sympathize with them because 1.5 million were killed. Then they were invited to create some kind of a nation. Then they were invaded, and today they are in war as well. So if we want to give example of colonialism, we could give few. If we want to give examples of imperialism, we can also work on few of them. I call it the wandering signifiers. Right now, endless words, signifiers of importance, are projected on Palestinian and Israelis alike. On one more, on one less, and I always think we really don't need so much a projection of all these concepts and hate to the Middle East. We need much more love in the Middle East. I'm thinking about the angel of history of Walter Benjamin, and I think we need an angel right now, but not the angel of history like Walter Benjamin, the angel of Cariance, I call it. Cariance is a word I invented to put together care and carry and wonder and feel. And this is something that artists are doing and art can do, like literature, like music. You're not really communicated, you are communicating. You care about a subject and you invest in it and you engage yourself in it and you give yourself to it. And then you give a bit your territory because you understand that you cannot touch vulnerable subject without becoming yourself a bit less powerful. So the angel of Carians will also look at the future because the angel of history of Walter Benjamin was hit by a wind, a progressive wind to the future, and he looked all the time on the past, and he saw the accumulation of wreckage and ruins, and he could not attend to them. Right now, it seems to me even a kind of, it's more than pragmatic, it's also an ethical question. We look at the situation, it's tragic and hopeless. The war must stop. I always write immediately, already after 3 days, stop the war, return the kidnapped, stop the war, compassion, what we need. Compassion is composed of passion, to have a passion together, to create something for the future. And art looks at the past in a different way, and art is a kind of imagination of a future, the opening of possibility, the poetic opening of possibilities. So I say, in each subject that aroused here, we can put a day conference. We can talk about the history of imperialism and then ask why we imagine imperialism only on that. And then the history of colonialism and ask why we imagine it only on that. And then, etc. And see how in each period where you have some negative major words, signifiers, they are projected on certain minorities. And the Jewish are among those minorities. But racism is racism. By the way, even anti-Semitism was for generation a religious subject, and it became a subject of racism only about 200 years ago, more or less. Before that, the problem was religions. And before that, in Europe, I'm thinking of Bertolt Brecht, all those people who were thinking about the problem before the war and during the war. Bertolt Brecht wrote about Mother Courage on the War of 30 Years that happened around 16 and something until, I think, 1648, right? Immediately when, this is the 30 years war, everybody fought everybody about, in Europe. And this was at that period between the Lutheran, Protestant, and the Catholic, and the result was kind of regrouping and new boundaries. But when the war finished, there was a pogrom. Why? There's so much misery, so many wounded, and so many killed, and what can we do? Human nature, we don't know how to deal with so much pain. So it turns into hate, and hate is on a group, on the minority group. Then each time you look in history, the big attacks, big anti-Semitic attacks, is when a period of war is finished, there is the pogrom. We finished with killing one another, and now let's kill 1,800 Jews, in the case of Chmelinsky, which was immediately after. So the question is both, okay, it's also political, it's also social, but it is also about human nature. It's also about psychoanalysis. It's also about, can we really look inside and deal with our shadows and our dark sides and our good sides? And can we face our fear of death? And by what instrument? By what mental instrument? So I insist that in the artistic way is, for me, a deceleration, slowing down. And also the acceleration and the media acceleration and the internet. This is a new era, that's a revolution. there is you talk about the symbolic, in fact, that people take upon themselves the symbol of something, but most of the symbolic today starts to be based on information, on the internet information that we take for real. And so what is the meaning of that? Through art and through certain artistic dimension, we can allow ourselves to slow down, have a look, and ask ourselves how we allow this or this or this to dominate our mind. Is it really, you know, me, or am I really engaged? And one of the things is you're engaged, you know, come and work with us, do something.
Ich fand das jetzt nochmal sehr interessant. Gerne. Auch nochmal so die lange historische Perspektive.
So I found that very interesting, this long historical perspective, including the 30 Years War, and talking about these two levels. One level is the political level. So the war, which was a religious war, was ended at some point. But then these long processes of working through the traumas and also forgiveness over decades. But this is something that doesn't happen overnight. And now I'd like to mention another level, and that is linked to art. So there are political discussions on how you can deal with the situation adequately, whether you side with Israel, how can you fight anti-Semitism and racism in Germany. Then we as philosophers are also confronted with this. I mean, we right now have an exhibition on Kant, the philosopher Kant, and where we talk about reason, and it's highly relevant to our discussions today. But coming back to art, because we're now on the home stretch really of our debate tonight. So what would you, as an artist, want an art institution like this museum or the Documenta? What is your expectation for the Documenta, for example, in this debate?
Well, I think I wrote it in my letter when I resigned from the Documenta. I wrote a few things. But first of all, and above all, I would wish that every curator will ask himself or herself, are we trying to impose a certain idea, political idea, and ask the artist to play for us? Or are we interested in art and try to identify things that we are even not hardly able to identify today? And if you talk about Kant, think about all the questions that it is very difficult to ask, even in the domain of art. To ask about beauty, to ask about the sublime, to ask questions that occupied the mind of philosophers for centuries. So we have to, instead of be afraid of all the concepts, we have to rethink them for now. For me, for example, the question of beauty has to do with compassion. It's inseparable. Or the question of the sublime is inseparable from the question of awe now. And what is awe? What is the sublime? We leave many notions. When there was the death of God, then there was the death of the subject, then everything that went with these ideas of God disappear. Or with a lot of ideas disappear when the human being killed the idea of God and then the idea of a subject. So we need to rethink them. If, I don't know, if there was the idea that God created human being in its image, and there was a prohibition on the image, by the way. And if so, there is no God anymore and there's no subject, so where do we want responsibility and freedom to come from, for example? And what is beauty? Now, think about, for example, the sublime. is a kind of an idea that we as human beings can stand in front of something and admit that it is bigger than us. As simple as that, we cannot even start to discuss today. So I would say the domain, the terrain between the aesthetics and ethics has moved. Artists are a part of it. And curators have to learn from scratch to look at the work of art. And why is it that in visual art it became so difficult? Probably because we are overwhelmed by images. There's so many images that we are overwhelmed. But with poetry or with music, you will still ask yourself, am I attracted to it? Am I enjoying it? Do I wish to join it? Do I wish to be a part of it? And with images, everything goes, and we are overwhelmed. So for me, the first question is, I wrote it in one of the mails to the documenta, that when a curator comes and would like to bring certain political idea that is already, by the way, 80 years old or 120 years old, and choose artists because according to this political idea, it is said, and what are we invited to think of? It's not only, I mean, politics take care of itself apparently very well. They know how to fight, they know who is right, and they know who is wrong. And art is a possibility, the capacity to give witness in a different way. But, you know, Paul Celan, also Primo Levi, both of them said that there will be no witness to witnesses. And they were afraid that when witnesses to horror will disappear, everything will disappear with them. But in art, you have a way to become a witness to the event in which you haven't been. There was this famous word about events without witnesses, but we can think about witnesses without the event. Now, how do you become a witness? Not through some kind of rationality that decides this is right, this is wrong, black and white. Suddenly everything, no dichotomies in any field except when we touch these questions that are now urgent. So in art, you can admit that we go beyond the dichotomies, that's first of all, that it does not have to submit itself to a political idea like this or like this, and I also consider the politics of art. When I think that even when the BDS says that art will be the battlefield, next battlefield, this is probably, I don't know, I hope that art will not be the battlefield, because everything else is already a battlefield. Everything else is a battlefield. So you can witness, but only if you are engaged in something. You don't just put some yes, no, heart on the Facebook and then go your own way. There is a function, there is a place for art when we realize that it's not going to aestheticize politics, just as Walter Benjamin is saying. It's impossible to as an artist, I cannot accept it. I don't want this.
Vielen Dank. Johanna Adam,
thank you very much. Johanna Adam, it's not gesagt ist. You said it so beautifully, so it's difficult to now make a statement after that. So this tension between an artist and an institution and politics that does play a role, And the audience, what about the audience, the visitors of the exhibition? So, now, against this background, what is your wish for the future of this debate and also for decision makers when it comes to managing such an institution as this institution here? Oh, that's many questions. So what you said about tension, I hope that it is not a field where two opposing camps fight with each other, but where we have an open field of dialogue, of engaging with each other. I absolutely share Bracha Ettinger's wish to free art from the burden of having to fulfill somebody's political idea. I would wish that policymakers, governments take our job as curators seriously as well and take our freedom also seriously. So what we've seen in some cases was people in politics panicking about certain things that happen in the arts. So with regard to a debate or the freedom of art, and I'm not talking about doing things without any rules. I haven't seen a single case where this was helpful, the intervention from politics. So I would wish that people show more confidence and trust in us, in what we do as curators. And I think I can say this on behalf of my colleagues as well. We do take our job very seriously. So responsibility is what this is all about. Our responsibility as curators, the way I see it and the way I hear it from my colleagues, is about creating contexts in a space, but even beyond this, also in temporal terms, also with regard to sender and recipient, with regard to our audiences, and to facilitate that, to moderate this. It's not about using works of art to justify a certain position or ideology or political view, to create a space where it is possible for works of art to exist and then create links and create a context. This is, I think, the core of my responsibility as a curator. And just one little thing that I want to add in terms of the documenter. We talked about the curator's responsibility some minutes ago, also in the context of Documenter 13. And here there was a decision by the curator that each participating artist should get to know the city of Kassel and its history. And this included a visit to the memorial and the former Nazi camp Bratenau. And I think this is one chance to deal with the responsibility as a curator when it comes to creating contexts. And this had nothing to do with an appeal to artists to produce a work of art on this. No, it was just raising awareness of the location where the documenta happened.
But in that case, I would also say that that the curator can, each curator can ask himself or herself under what kind of feeling and criteria and thinking I do believe that this work has to be there and another work is not. Because the difficulty right now is to make the difference even between, and always have been, and we can go back to Joseph Beuys and ask many questions. What is art? What is a work of art? Is every decoration a work of art? Is every conversation a work of art? So let's do conversation. There's relational art. Is every relation art? Why is it art? What is the difference? Why would you call something still art and insist on it? And these are big questions that has to do with the curatorial, I mean, each artist have her own reply to that, but the responsibility is not only because of conversation or because of contextualization. It is also has to do, I think, with the basic idea of subjectivity itself. What is the subject today? Mm-hmm. What is the subject matter that drives us? And what is the structure of subject? You know that in psychology, for example, and also in philosophy, the idea of the subject, and in Freud, was based on, is very much resembling the biological system where, with Freud says that the I, the self, begins by pushing out what it doesn't like and defining itself through what it likes. So the I become that which is wonderful, and that which is not I become that which is rejected. We have a model here. We have a model of an idea of what is a subject. Subject is based on rejecting the other. Or, I don't know, you go to German history or philosophy, you go to Heidegger, who says the only authentic possibility to become a subject is to face the fear and the anxiety of your own death. And he says the death of the other does not concern the subject authentically. This is a huge statement. That when I talk, for example, I started and I talked about the feminine and the maternal, or what I call the matrixial, is because I say, how about destabilizing this even idea of what is a human being and what is a subject? What if instead of saying I construct myself and my identity through the rejection of somebody else, and the only death that counts is my own death, my anxiety towards my own existence, what about if we think about the way we recognize one another precisely through co-emerging, through approaching one another? And this happens whether we like it or not, because we are connected in deep ways, and art is a way of connecting us in a deep way.
Wäre jetzt super interessant, das philosophisch zu vertiefen.
Well, it's extremely interesting, and I'd really love to look more into the philosophical aspects and how we are interlinked. You mentioned Heidegger, you know, what is it that sort of links the world, and we're all social creatures, but I'm afraid we need to draw a line here. Just one question to you. You have worked with several institutions, and what would be your request, your wish, or your recommendation? So one last big question for tonight. I mean, it's great when the artists and the curators are doing such a great job, but what do the institutions do whenever there is a problem? How can we strike the right balance here between real freedom of opinion on the one hand, while at the same time opposing any positions that are too radical? Well, it's no coincidence that freedom of art is protected by law, and that basically covers it all. It's a fact that anti-Semitism or racism or xenophobia and things like that, as such, are not a criminal offense. I mean, we do have a criminal offense if you incite hatred against others, and if you do that, then you will be held liable for it. But first we need to assume that the things we see in society, and I'm afraid we do see these phenomena that I just mentioned, will always find their way to all the different venues, be it theaters, convention halls, international festivals. And therefore, I mean, I understand that there's a wish to eliminate that completely, racism, etc. But that's not possible. And therefore, the question is, if we dislike it, then what are the right means to oppose it? And I would like to come back to Johanna Adam, and I agree with something that she just said. If we make the mistake and start putting a certain group of people under suspicion on a sweeping basis, and then we call the entire system into question. And then we look at, what individual artists may have been doing, what petitions they may have signed, etc. Maybe even with a good intention, because we want to oppose something that we consider to be bad. But if we do that, then we are basically ruining the very basis for everything that is making our culture free and liberal, which means we need a new approach. And that doesn't mean that we should automatically faint the moment we come across something we don't like, but we should talk about it. We should discuss it. Just one last sentence. I don't want to talk this problem down. And when I started out, I also looked into it, and I figured art and culture are also a moral force. Artists are also philosophers, and they are sort of superior, philosophically speaking. But the more I really looked into it, I realized, well, artists and curators and anyone who's part of this world are also just human beings, are just human. A mensch as a mensch. And 10 days after 7th of October, 8,000 artists and people from the art world signed a petition, which was published in the Art Forum, among other places. And I mean, what an achievement to talk about the war without even mentioning the massacre of 7th of October at all. Far less did they even mention Hamas specifically in that petition. I mean, I think then it's really fair to say there are at least 8,000 people, some of whom are very prominent players in the world of art and cultures, who have no moral at all, who are completely immoral. And I'm not saying that we should stop displaying their artworks or should stop promoting them. I mean, I wish them all the best, but for me, this indicates that this sphere of art also needs to be more humble, because artists, curators, etc. are also, well, just human. And in part, that is a bitter conclusion. And we really need to have this debate internally in our society. And we can't do that by cutting the debate short. We also need to talk about the basics, and we need to be able to deal with criticism. And we have to be prepared to not just insist on our own moral point of view, but instead we should accept the insight that maybe the person we're talking to is right as well. Okay, I think we should use this as a concluding statement. We have, well, raised a lot of different subjects. It was obvious from the start that we would not be able to finalize our debate. After all, it's a series of talks anyway. On 12th of March and 11th of June, we will be able to continue our talks. I would like to thank our guests very much for this very focused debate. I hope that the audience liked it as well. Personally, I have learned a lot. Have a safe way home. It's snowing outside, and to be continued.
Chapeau, well done.
1,5 Stunden, krass.
Johanna bleibt noch. Johanna?